Just going to bring us in like
recording in progress. Okay. Hey, this is a quick hit. I'm here with Scott Hounsell, one of my contributor buddies from RedState, and we're going to talk about Ukraine. And so, Scott, today was a big development in the world of Ukraine. People finally lost patience, and Russia signed a friendship agreement with two of the parties that have been separatists in the Donbass region of Ukraine. And under that pretext is sending what are essentially, they are calling peacekeepers into that part of Ukraine to basically change the game in terms of who is there and who's shooting at whom. That, for people that don't know, that particular conflict has been going on since 2015, right after the right around the time of the annexation of Crimea, and has been running on a slow burner for the better part of 7-8 years. All of a sudden, it's a big deal as the year ends, and now it's a global crisis. Today's move is basically follows a series of failed negotiations or attempts to negotiate between what is essentially the United States and Russia, with Ukraine, its government, and Western Europe kind of caught in the middle of it. We've seen in the past couple of weeks the French trying to be mediators, the Turks trying to be mediators, the Germans trying to be mediators, and they're seeing their world as far as economic integration with Russia falling apart because of this. And
don't forget the Brits. The Brits tried too.
The Brits tried, and then the Brits have now kind of joined the Americans in terms of being more belligerent vis-a-vis the Russians. So they're clearly frustrated by what's going on. And the United States is probably the most belligerent of all in terms of calling the Russians out, and has been on a steady campaign of basically trying to get the Russians to back down, with the Russians on their part trying to get the Americans to back down. So today they amped up the energy, and now we have Russian troops in the separatist region of Ukraine. Interestingly enough, the US response to that was to immediately impose sanctions on those regions, but not impose any sanctions on Russia, which has caused some observers to call into question whether or not the US really means to confront Russia, or if in the end Putin's getting what he wants.
Well, I think it's Putin's getting what he wants, and I think it's also that the United States is completely impotent in this particular realm. We have a president who touted, and during his election, that he was the only one that could go toe-to-toe with Vladimir Putin, but who has lost every single toe-to-toe moment with Putin over the course of the last 6 or 8 weeks? Joe Biden. This idea that the thing that really frustrates me about this, and that is not being explained, what needs to be explained is that there's been an illegal immigration problem that has been going in from Russia into the western portion or eastern portions of Ukraine. So that now when Putin says we have Russian citizens that we are going in to defend, that's why we have to go in. We have to go in and stop the bloodshed and stop and protect our citizens. It's only because they've been handing out passports, Russian passports, willy-nilly, and having illegal immigration in the eastern portion of the country. So they have citizens to defend in the first place. This is an old Soviet trick that was the way that they expanded the Soviet Empire for a while, was that they would send in these communists into these areas and convince people that communism was superior to capitalistic stuff. This is no different. This is Putin sending in people saying, look, you can have it or you can join us and we'll be fine. It's the same thing they did with, as you said, with Crimea. They did the same thing, issuing a bunch of passports in the area, and now they have citizens they have to defend. It's the same thing they did in Georgia and South Ossetia, where they went in and did the same thing. They issued passports and said, well, now we got to go in and protect our citizens. Putin is a master manipulator. He's a master manipulator. He's been on what do you expect for the former spy chief of the Soviet Empire? I mean, essentially what he was. And so now, why do we expect him to not use these tactics, these Soviet tactics, in expanding the Russian Empire? And that's essentially what he's doing. What stops him from doing this to Poland in a few years?
Unknown. Okay. The question on everybody's mind for tomorrow, or actually now in Europe, is so what's the next step to all this? Given that things are amped up, does the U.S. now have to carry through with ramping up sanctions?
Well, I think that they have to, but I don't think they will.
Well, that's the question.
The two answers to the same question are, yes, they have to do it, or else we appear impotent and unable to carry forward on stuff. But two, we're not going to be able to do it because we are impotent and unable to carry forward on stuff. I've said this before to a few liberal friends over the course of last week, but if Trump were in the White House, would Putin be taking the same action?
Oh, probably not.
Of course not.
Yeah.
Trump would not tolerate this for one freaking second.
That no.
Somehow
Biden. Okay. Yeah. But okay. So here's the real question that comes out for me, and I'd like your opinion on this. Is that given that we found ourselves in as you call it, an impotent pickle, right? Where our options are at this point very, very limited. Every pundit that's out there is basically going, we've been outmaneuvered, and without a lot of trouble. So my question to you in this is, given that we are so disadvantaged, what was the motivation for doing this in the first place? Because those troops, they come around every year. They were around in about the same numbers. April of last year, nothing happened. They came around for their winter exercises. They were supposed to leave after this weekend. They didn't, but they were scheduled to leave. And so somehow or other, this whole thing has gotten blown up to the point that now they're not leaving. And he's got the money so that they don't have to leave, because oil is at like $90 a barrel. So, he can pay the freight for to keep these people fed on the border pretty much indefinitely. The real question that really bothers me about this is, why did the U.S. do this in terms of at this time? I mean, I've heard everything from this is finding something to do for the election, the U.S. Analytical apparatus, the Washington people basically trying to find something to save face because of the embarrassment of Afghanistan. But are any of these reasons a good reason for why we're here right now?
I certainly, and as we talked about on the Wednesday VIP Gold Show over at RedState, which you can find every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. over at RedState VIP. Use promo code Hounsell to get that. We have great guests like Dennis. Sorry, I got to do my own plugs every now and then. But on the Wednesday VIP Gold Show the other night, I wrote "Wag the Dog" in Ukrainian, because I do believe this is a wag the dog moment. Democrats are inherently headed for a bloodbath in the midterms. The only thing that can save them is some sort of fundamental issue that changes. A 9/11, a Pearl Harbor, a whatever it may be, that will be the thing that's the ignition point for the change for Democrats. I don't see it happening anytime soon here. That's part of my concern, is that Democrats are so focused on winning elections that they're willing to essentially destroy our soft power around the world based upon this, that they believe that these perpetual negotiations or perpetual carrots in this case don't ever involve a stick. And their sticks now are, well, we're going to impose sanctions on the people that are being invaded, essentially, is what they're doing. Because if you think about it, this is not 100% Russian areas. There are probably significant Ukrainian people within this. And now they're imposing sanctions on essentially victims of an invasion from a foreign country, not the invading force. If I were president of the United States, I'd cease any and all trade with Russia tomorrow until they backed off. I'd cease any and all trade. I would, and I'd roll into the Security Council tomorrow and demand that Russia lose their seat over this. This is nothing more than nation building, except it's doing it under the guise of, well, we're protecting our citizens. No, you're building your Soviet empire all over again under the premise of we're protecting our citizens. So why did the US do it? I have no idea. I think that they were doing it because they ultimately thought Putin would blink, or that Putin never intended to invade. So if he didn't, then it would make the US look strong. Like, I think that there's a portion of it, just like you said, they do this every year. These exercises happen on this border every year like clockwork. So I think what the US was doing is they're going out and flexing their muscles and going, oh, look how strong we are. We're telling the Russians to back off, like they do every year on their own, but we're telling them to back off. And I think Putin got into a dick measuring contest with Biden, and Biden ultimately lost. And it makes us look even worse, especially after the embarrassing total failure what was the Biden administration's pullout of Afghanistan. At this point, if I were living in Taiwan, I'd be really scared about what my next 6 months holds.
Well, yeah. I mean, especially considering that we call out the Taiwanese as bad Chinese because of their chip factory. I'm not really sure where that one came from either. But
and then also the U.S. went and leaned on the Taiwanese to participate in the opening ceremonies of the Chinese Olympics.
Yeah, I don't get it. So, okay, so if this turns out to have been this massive exercise looking for some way to create the appearance of a Pyrrhic victory for election purposes, what do you think the consequence is going to be? I mean, it's really bad for the United States to to lose twice in 12 months on this planet. We blew Afghanistan. Now we're going to blow Ukraine.
Well, the point that I keep on asking people, especially my liberal friends, I live in, as you do, in the People's Republic of California. We're surrounded by liberals who claim that the Biden administration, the election of Biden, was the best thing that has happened since Trump. And I can understand, ideologically speaking, why they would feel that way. But what is better now, especially in foreign policy, when we're talking about, like, what is better now than it was under Trump? I mean, we talk about the fact that, like, we talk about gas prices, and that the Biden administration says, well, we're going to lean on OPEC. We're going to make this work because we're going to lean on OPEC, and we're going to make them fold. We're going to get them to increase production. Didn't happen. When we had and again, these are all foreign policy issues that we're failing on. When we have the issue with the Chinese production coming to the U.S., the supply chain issues and everything, the rest of it, it's primarily China driven. We were going to do something about that. We didn't do anything about that. There still is a parking lot of ships out in Long Beach Harbor, just south of here. We're still dealing with the fact that we can't produce cars because we don't have the chips to put in them. I think I read something the other day that there's been a 40% increase in prices of used vehicles over the course of the last 6 months. I mean, in June of last year, I bought a 2004 Chevy Suburban. I paid $5,500 for it. I saw the same car, same mileage, same model, same build and everything else, same, all the submodel and everything else, for twice as much just this last week. To me, it just shows that the utter ineptness that is in the White House. And I don't mean to make this purely ideological at this point, but what else can it be? We can't lose this often and this drastically and be so far behind the 8 ball on everything if it wasn't the fact that we had inept leadership.
Well,
I don't see how else it can be blamed.
So today is just another artifact of this. That's a sad statement on where we are.
It certainly is. And again, going back to Ukraine, is where do we go? What action could we take? So we apply sanctions to Russia. So where do we drive Russia into? The open arms of the Chinese.
Or we lose our allies because they don't go along with it.
Right. So the Chinese say to, everything that we don't get from, or we don't, and the last thing we need is Russia and China butting up together against the U.S.
Or
in
Germany.
reality, what?
Or Germany.
I'm less worried about Germany, considering that, like, tomorrow, if we just pulled NATO funding, Germany is a sitting duck and they wouldn't like the Russians sitting there. I mean, the Russians are one country away from Germany.
It's true, but they're also the biggest consumer of Russian oil and gas.
Right. But the point that exists is Russia would then say, well, if you want our oil and gas, you're going to have to accept that, like, we're in charge.
Yeah.
It's the same exact thing we're dealing with here in the United States. It's like we went and destroyed oil futures by cutting pipelines. We announced that we would a fracking ban, that we wouldn't be able to do this. So we killed oil futures, destroyed them overnight with two stupid policy decisions that had no way of replacing the energy we would have used. So oil futures are screwed. Then we go on to suggest that the Enbridge Line 5 pipeline going through Michigan is also going to get shut down. We talked about the fact that there was an oil pipeline hacked in the Eastern United States in the beginning of the Biden administration by the Russians that went unanswered in foreign policy. We've been letting Russia eat our lunch every turn, every corner, every bit since the beginning of the Biden administration. And again, where do we turn? What do we do now? Because at this point, the only thing that does end this is military action.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, that ends a lot of other stuff too.
Right. It's that are we ready? Are we willing to go to this length? Are we willing to drive to this corner of the map to start this action?
Kind of reminds you of how World War I started, doesn't it?
Right. Well, I mean, someone the other day said, I saw a meme on Facebook the other day that said, it was like the same sort of thing, and it said it said, oh, the defense of Constantinople. Do you want modern weapons? And like someone in Time Machine goes back and gets modern weapons, and we solve both World War I, World War II, and our present day issues all over just ending the defense of Constantinople. My point that exists with this is that the United States has painted ourselves into a corner. We went out with tough dog attitude, and it happened during the Obama administration. How many red lines did Russia cross during the Obama administration? It was constant.
Yep.
Obama would get out and go, well, you're not going to cross this line. This is the line we're not crossing. You're going to stop right here. This is the end of this. We're no more fooling around. Vladimir Putin, I'm in charge, blah, blah, blah. And Putin, South Ossetia, mine now.
Yeah. Well, Russian military police are at this point patrolling the border between Lebanon and Israel.
Right. We found out about the Russian bounty story, which potentially may not have been fully fleshed out, may not be completely true, but there was a way that they were dunking on Trump, saying that the Russians were putting bounties on American soldiers. What's any different than what's going on now? What's any different than literally the Russians laughing at U.S. foreign policy? Because, I mean, are they doing anything different than that right now? We went out and placed sanctions on the victims of the people who they're invading.
Yep. Yeah, doesn't make sense to me either. And which is, I think, the overarching comment on the events of the day. Things just aren't making sense.
Do you have any answer why, though? Like, and I know that we talked about why we did this or any of the rest, but why the left would be so soft on Russia specifically? I have my own theories on it, but I want to hear your thoughts.
My theory on this is that there really is no intention by the people on the left for the U.S. to continue to dominate in any way, shape, or form the global stability of the planet, that we're basically demobilizing and giving up because they don't know what to do.
I think what it ultimately,
I mean, you could paint that in a sinister manner, but the bottom line is they haven't got the heart to help the world anymore.
what this does is that I genuinely believe that while Vladimir Putin wants to reignite the Cold War in a lot of ways, in my opinion, I think the U.S. current leftist leadership is already drafting their surrender to Russia. And what I mean by that is I think that there's this ideological difference. I genuinely believe that Russia is using capitalistic ideals to reignite a communist regime, very much like they did that they've done in China. China's used capitalistic principles to enrich themselves to fund a communist regime.
Well, I can see that because that's a classic asymmetric attack.
Right.
You know,
And
which
so
and the rules of asymmetric warfare are you use things that your enemy cannot respond to because they have a natural vulnerability to it, and we have a natural vulnerability to such things, and that we really don't do well even trying to fix things domestically, and that's a weakness. And as long as that vulnerability exists, we're an easy target.
I think that they're already rewriting the future history books, though. I think that what this is that they're going to that if the reason why they don't see the Chinese as evil, the reason why they don't see the Russians as evil, or I don't see it's evil, but it's horribly misguided, violent, trying to expand. You know, they don't. Russia's not happy with owning the land they want more. China's not happy with owning the land that they want. They want more. It's the same reason why they're snuffing out the Uyghurs. They're going to do the same to Mongolians at some point. They're going to do the Taiwanese. And if China could get away with it, they do it to the Indians tomorrow. Now, the point that exists here is I think the left finds themselves ideologically in line with China, ideologically in line with Russia. That I believe that they believe deep down that the way that they're going to rewrite the history books is the last 30 years was a hiccup, and that they didn't really lose the Cold War. It went to a frigid war. And now that they're regaining their power, now that they're taking back over, communism was always the preferred economic structure. It survived beyond capitalism. Capitalism had won the battle, but ultimately communism won the war. That's where I think that they're headed. And that's why they don't fight this. I think that they genuinely would be okay with communist Chinese control of the U.S. or communist Russian control of the U.S. than they would of right-wing freedom, liberty, less government in the U.S. They would rather have Putin than they would have Trump. They'd rather have Xi Jinping than they would Trump.
Point taken. And I think that's kind of probably where we need to leave it for the day. And
Got it. I enjoy these conversations with you. I enjoy having, as we always do.
Yeah, but you know, we are clearly in a very confused moment as far as I think we got outmaneuvered again, and we're going to pay yet another price on the world stage in terms of our prestige. And I'm not really sure that we have any idea right now as to what to do to recover from it and move forward. To your point, I think there is a sentiment inside among our own fellow citizens that is really just giving up and letting go of a role that we played in the world. And I have to tell you the truth. I mean, you know, I think there are many other people on this planet that are afraid because they were kind of counting on us not to turn out to be as mediocre as we're turning out to be.
Our role in the world is a double-edged sword. Certainly people were, you know, we enjoy the people that trust us and rely upon us, and we essentially pay for their loyalty with foreign, you know, with all the money we send them and all the rest of it. It's how we got out of the Cold War. We bought everyone off.
Yeah.
But now we're getting to the point where people are great. I can get the money and all the rest of it. But China, Russia,
they have money now too.
The same amount.
Yeah, they now have. They have just as much.
Too.
As a matter of fact, I think when it comes to oil, most of the long-term contract commitments are now owned by China.
Look at the mineral resources of Africa.
Yeah, I wrote about that the other day.
Right.
That,
All the
you know,
mineral resources of Africa are owned by China primarily, and now they're now doing all of uh, the logistical aspects of it. They're now buying out railroads and ports and all the rest of it. And so pretty soon, in order to get anything out of Africa, that's lithium, that's copper, that's gold, that's diamonds, that's oil, that's I mean, Nigeria sits on a pretty substantial oil reserve. Uh, all that is going to go through the Chinese, and they're going to decide whether or not we want it. You think we have a problem with chip shortages right now? Just wait till that chip shortages become engine shortages or steel or whatever it may be. When we kneecapped our own selves with production here in the United States and sent it all abroad and did all the rest of that, we prohibited our own ability to respond to issues exactly like what we're dealing with today. That when the Chinese decide we're just not sending you chips anymore, or we're going to limit the amount of chips that come over to you, I don't believe that there's any type of shortage. I think the Chinese are doing this intentionally. It kneecaps our entire economy.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you know, like, I think it was a couple days ago, the thing I was focusing on for the weekend was the fact that you've got all the climate change people, all the woke climate change people here, not realizing that, while they're patting themselves on the back about letting go of oil, that in fact all they're really doing is changing from drilling holes in the ground to strip mining the planet, which is just as bad environmentally as the other thing was.
Right. And again, this all kind of got to leap this all back to the reason why we have this call with the Ukraine, and we'll wrap this up. I know that you wanted to move on, but the point that exists is that these are the issues we've been dealing with for a decade, for 20 years now.
Yeah.
And we just have been ignoring it. We've been kicking the can. And
Yeah.
at what point does little regional spats where they take over little parts of the country here and there and move the border? I mean, your borders in Europe, in Western Europe, have been moving for thousands of years.
Oh yeah,
A
yeah,
little bit
yeah.
here, a little bit there.
Yeah.
There was a bunch of territory between the French and the Germans that was going back and forth for a while.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
look
this
at
is what
Ottoman
yeah, exactly. This is what the Europeans do. They move borders 5 to 10 miles back and forth, like every 10 years, you know, something will move.
Right.
And so when you look at what's happening in Ukraine now, it's not much different from one of the normal itty bitty moves that happens. You know, everybody gets excited about it when it happens, but that's the pattern of European conflict is they blow steam by doing this kind of stuff. And I don't know, and this will be the final question, but I don't know that we, being an innocent culture, a naive one, I think, on this side of the Atlantic, really have any understanding of how what's happening over there to them is a bit more normal than we think it is to us.
You look at what happened in the lead up to both world wars we've previously been in. The United States has dealt with an issue of the lack of information to the people, to understanding what's truly going on. So when we were firing off oil embargoes against Japan, a lot of people locally, or not locally, but domestically, were going, well, why are we doing that? Well, why would we put an oil embargo against a foreign country? And we didn't realize, like, Japan was literally arming everything up so they could invade China. And that's why we placed those embargoes. And I think that there's a huge issue, and it's a travesty that there's an issue. When in history has there been an easier access to information than today? And yet we live in one of the most ignorant, uneducated societies that has ever existed. Look what China does with TikTok. So in TikTok, we look here in the US and it's like fart videos and people dance around doing stupid stuff and, like, you know, mouthing everything else. And in China, TikTok's used to spread videos of kids doing engineering projects and inventing things and all the rest of it. This is ideological warfare. This is culture warfare is what it is. And the Chinese and Russians are focused like a laser beam on their own self-interest. And they have us chasing every ghost in the racism, wokeism, climate change, the gender, transgender stuff, and Dave Chappelle. And those are national issues to us. Not the fact that homelessness is out of control, not the fact that we have no way of defending ourselves currently because our military is pared back since the lowest levels since post 9/11. Everything that we're looking at, we failed, but we're focused on the insignificant bullshit that they have us chasing down of, did you hear what Ricky Gervais said last week about this dude? We are so far gone from the glory days of the greatest generation. We use okay boomers an insult, but these boomers grew up in homes where they watched their parents literally recover from a war. And we've had no one in doing it. The war that we had, 4,000 people in here, 4,000 people there. We're not talking about 500,000 people being vaporized in a war over the course of 4 years during World War II.
Yeah, it's been a very lucky time.
Right. And so anyway, as long as the U.S. fails to enforce the mandates or enforce the rules that they do it, we're going to continue to be walked on. And all it takes is one time enforcing it. That even if we don't follow it every time in the future, foreign powers will always question when we will and will not enforce it. We haven't enforced a damn thing in 30 years, not since the Reagan administration.
Trying to think. Yeah.
We've never once come out and said, this is the red line, don't cross it. It hasn't happened. Maybe Iraq with, but that all turned out to be BS. There was no weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah, I know. I mean, every time we've done something, it was based on
abysmal failure after abysmal failure.
Well, our own imagination, which is kind of what worries me right now, is how much of our own ability to bamboozle ourselves is playing into why we are getting walked on in Ukraine. We've clearly misread all the signs.
Well, the point that exists is how much of this became a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is pushing Putin to the point where he has to act or he appears weak.
Yeah. Well, I'll ask the more sinister question. How much of this pushing Putin to the point that he has to act or appears weak is on purpose from our side?
Oh, don't get me wrong. I think it's intentional. I just don't understand what the motivations and what the goals.
Yeah, neither do I. Which is kind of the core question of what I wanted to get to in this discussion, is try to begin to ask that question of what is the core motivation of the Biden administration, the Washington establishment, into why we are going down this path at this time during a period of time where we
supremacy. I genuinely believe it's ideological supremacy. They're going to point back. They're going to point back and go, Bush went to war over this. Trump did this, and this was all wrong. And it took being peaceful and talks and yay, we made it work because we were so grateful and happy with them. And in reality, sometimes you got to walk in and say carrot, stick, and the stick's already in the motion of swinging if they don't accept the carrot. And that's kind of how I think that we need to approach this with Ukraine, is walk in and say, we're going to sanction everything that leaves it. And we're going to sanction any of our allies that accept any of your stuff. We're going to sanction everyone until you get your shit in line.
Well, you know what's kind of weird about that? That's what we're telling everybody about Afghanistan. We won't let anybody help them, but we won't do the same in Ukraine. So like, why apply it selectively? What's the motivation for that?
Why did they do it with Cuba for 50 years?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, to me, it's the foreign policy in the United States has been irreparably broken since Ronaldus Magnus left the White House. It has been irreparably broken. All we've done for the last 30 years now is let the CIA run our foreign policy. whether it was literally a CIA director who became president, George H.W. Bush, whether it was Clinton with Bosnia and Herzegovina and all the stuff that we had there. The Bosnian War was all just a bunch of fired up everything else. The failures of 9/11, which then had to be made up by the intelligence apparatus of the United States to try to cover for the fact that they let 5 people into the country who flew planes. One of them didn't make it, but 5 people in the country who flew planes into towers. Zacharias Moussaoui was caught before 9/11, and they failed to get out of him that there was a huge thing going on. This is our entire foreign policy apparatus has been run by intelligence agencies and not by charismatic leaders, which has previously been the case.
Correct.
JFK, charismatic leader.
Charismatic leader.
Okay. But even with Clinton was somewhat charismatic. Sure, the Bosnian War wasn't exactly where I would have sent NATO troops, but long and the short of it is that's where they went. But
He had a belief. He had a belief set for that one.
Right. But I mean, Ronald Reagan, charismatic. Even going back to FDR was charismatic in a way. A lot of people liked FDR. But we now have gone to the point where now we have administrators running the country as opposed to charismatic leaders who can make connections. The fact that, you could have Reagan sitting down with Soviet leaders in summits was unheard of. If you'd said in the early 70s, an American president is going to sit down with a Russian leader and they're going to work out the Cold War. I mean, Gorbachev would have never sat down with anyone else other than Ronald Reagan, in my opinion. So again, to kind of get back to the fact is I think that Joe Biden, and which I don't think Joe Biden is in control of this. I think it's his administration.
I think Washington is running on autopilot.
Right. I think what it is now is that they're trying to make a case for ideological supremacy. Look how good we are. Look how awesome we are. Look how great our peaceful means of achieving peace were. So look, we're great, as opposed to whenever we would lift the stick and say, you can follow what we need you to do, or we're going to wipe you off the face of the planet. Not that we need to go to the Russians and start declaring war, but we can say, I got news for you. See these oil and gas reserves? These are airstrike. There's an airstrike on these tomorrow if you don't play nice. That's it.
Well, so where we leave it tonight is that, and this time we will leave it here, is that it looks like we've been outmaneuvered yet again, and in his last iteration of going around the subject, that I think both of us are very much wondering whether or not the U.S. apparatus that is running on autopilot, run by bureaucrats, is any good at all. We need a charismatic leader, I think, is what I think both of us are saying. Without that, we've got not a lot to fight with on this planet, and everybody else on this planet that does have real leadership knows how weak we are because of it. Do you agree with that?
Well, of course. Do you think the Russian citizens are worried about the U.S.? Do you think China?
No, I'm not really sure that anybody is worried about the U.S.
Worried about the U.S.?
I don't think anybody's worried about the U.S. at this point.
No
After
one's
Afghanistan.
Nope. They know that we're completely inept. We're incapable of defending ourselves. And until we get that leader in there who's going to sit down with them one-on-one and say, look, I want to be your friend. Don't make me your enemy, which is kind of the way that Reagan hit it with Gorbachev, was like, look, we can be buddies or we can be at war and destroy each other. So let's figure out a way to make this work and be buddies. Don't make your 80% friend or your 80% friend your 20% enemy. And right now, the U.S. went out and gambled trying to make them our 100% enemy, and we lost.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Oh, final question.
Yeah.
Jimmy Carter.
Yes.
Who started off rather feckless himself.
Right.
Found wind in the last year of his presidency. Where he finally started to begin to get it. Do you think there's a chance that Biden will finally start to begin to get it after all of this, or are we just really hosed on this one?
Biden doesn't make it to his final year of presidency. He'll be 25th long before then. I have January 1st, 2023. or January 21st, 2023, is from that point forward, it's a ticking clock. They're holding out till then. So Kamala, if she does become president, can get 2 terms. There's so many chess pieces moving in my head on this. But ultimately, I don't think Biden makes it till his final year. I think that Biden's a placeholder and they can figure out someone that's better off.
Well,
And I don't even think it's Kamala in this particular case.
I'm not really sure it's her either. What I do believe, and I think you believe with me, is that the DC bureaucracy, having gained power, is not of a mind to give it up anytime soon.
I have a theory on this. Kamala to Supreme Court. Biden anoints a new VP and then resigns shortly after the first of the year.
Interesting.
I don't know who that replacement is, but Kamala Supreme Court gives them an excuse to free up that space to put someone in here there who they believe can take over in the case that Biden doesn't make till his final year. I don't think he does, especially if the Republicans take control of the House and Senate. They'll impeach him overnight.
Well, there is a that's an interesting topic for another hour when it happens. In the meantime, thanks a lot, Scott. I know it was a quick call. I tried to get some of the other guys that wrote articles about Ukraine today to come on, but we got them in the middle of their dinner hour. So
anytime, good buddy. Anytime you need me, I'll be there for you. You know that.
You got it, pal. All right. RedState, here we go.